Two of the highest profile murder cases in United States history took place almost 60 years apart. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy in Dealey Plaza in November of 1963, and the murder of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh in South Carolina in June of 2021. Both murder cases riveted American and world interest. Both cases had a number of twists and turns, and the public got an intimate look at how investigators and prosecutors developed their case, all through a veil of public scrutiny and no shortage of second-guessing. We can all learn a lot from examining how the cases were developed, investigated, and prosecuted by law enforcement and official agencies, and make up our own mind about the outcome of each. Let's analyze and compare the two cases. 1. Securing the crime scene. 2. Gathering witness statements as quickly and accurately as possible. 3. Gathering evidence associated with the crime.
We are not here distributing blame or pointing the finger of judgment. We must deal with the world as it is.
John Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was the youngest man ever elected to the office of President. Kennedy represented a change from the old guard and mantra of us versus them that the country had experienced under previous presidents, Truman and Eisenhower. JFK had guided the country through a dangerous period with the Cuban Missile Crisis and had established a solid foundation of détente with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Back-channel communications were also leading to at least consideration of more normalized relations with Cuba and their military leader, Fidel Castro. Some Cold Warriors in the American military and intelligence communities did not feel Kennedy's peace initiatives were a good thing, especially when it came to Cuba, and many anti-Castro Cuban paramilitary groups had active CIA funding and were being trained both in Florida and at Lake Pontchartrain near New Orleans. It was under those circumstances that JFK's trip to Dallas took place in November of 1963. The Dallas crowds matched the positive, enthusiastic reception for the Kennedys as their motorcade headed down Houston Street and then made a sharp left turn onto Elm Street. The Murdaugh family was very well known in Colleton County, South Carolina, part of an area known as the Low Country. Attorney Alex Murdaugh and his wife Maggie, along with their two sons, Buster and Paul, lived on an estate called Moselle, a sprawling 1,700-acre tract of land that included a home, hunting land, woods, a dog kennel, and other structures. Alex's grandfather and father had also been lawyers in that same area, and both held the title of solicitor for the county, the same position that many of us know as county prosecutor. The real wealth of the Murdaughs had come from being in private practice, and especially from representing clients in personal injury suits through the firm of Peters, Murtaugh, and Parker. The Murdaugh family was very well known in Colleton County, South Carolina, part of an area known as the Low Country. Maggie got to Moselle just about the time Alex returned after being in the office for a few hours that Monday, June 7th. Alex said he spent at least an hour riding around the grounds with his son Paul, and that he and Paul headed separately to the house to have dinner with Maggie. Their other son Buster was out of town. Later in the evening, Alex will return from visiting his mother and go to the kennel when he doesn't find his wife and son at the house. There, Alex will find Maggie and Paul brutally killed by being shot each multiple times. In Dallas, by the time the president's limousine appears from behind a Stemmons Freeway sign, it is clear he had been shot. The president is clutching at his throat, and Mrs. Kennedy is alarmed. Texas Governor John Connally, riding in front of JFK, has recognized the first shot, and he turns to look at the president. As Connally turns again, he himself is shot and falls into the seat. As the limo reaches the area by the grassy knoll, more shots are heard. The president receives a horrendous headshot. The motorcade speeds to Parkland Hospital, where efforts to save the president are in vain, and he dies. Of course, the two cases are very different in scope, and securing the crime scene should have been much easier at the Murdaugh kennels at Moselle, and that is precisely what we find. Although responders must travel a bit to get there, once they do arrive, they immediately begin restricting all movement around the two bodies and erect crime tape. They also keep at least one officer with Alex Murdaugh. This officer also immediately begins questioning Alex. The Murdaugh house is also searched relatively quickly as more investigators arrive. We have to give a grade of A to the Colleton County responders and the investigators from SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. Right after the shots rang out in Dealey Plaza, many people thought at least one or more of those shots came from behind the fence on the grassy knoll. Some saw a puff of gun smoke, and some who ran up the knoll smelled gunpowder. Dallas police officer Joe Marshall Smith wasn't sure where the shots came from, but he immediately had a woman tugging on his arm, saying that they are shooting the president from the bushes on the knoll. Officer Smith ran up the small hill, past the fence, and into the parking lot by the railroad yards. Smith had his gun drawn and pointed it at a man there. The man pulled out Secret Service credentials from his hip pocket, which Officer Smith recognized as being real, and so continued on. As confirmed by the Warren Commission, there were no real Secret Service agents in Dealey Plaza at that time. They were all in the motorcade and headed to Parkland Hospital with the president. Officer Smith will later recount that the credentials looked real, but the man he encountered didn't look like a Secret Service agent. He had on a sports shirt and had dirty hands, looking more like an auto mechanic. Deputy Constable Seymour Weitzman and others will report being stopped by men with Secret Service credentials, both in the Grassy Knoll area and by the Texas School Book Depository. Meanwhile, Dallas officer Marion Baker saw birds fly off the roof of the book depository building at the sound of the shots, and immediately ran into the building, joined by building supervisor Roy Truly, who had been watching the motorcade from the steps. They encountered Lee Oswald within 2 to 3 minutes in the second-floor lunchroom. It is true that the book depository building will not be sealed off for at least 15 minutes, but overall the Dallas police did a very credible job of getting to the areas they thought were critical, the knoll and the book depository. If the case had gone to court against Oswald, there would have been much more attention given to the fake Secret Service officers, maybe even to the extent of proving a conspiracy. So we have to give the responding Dallas officers a grade of B+ for getting to critical areas of interest and trying to seal them off to the best of their limited ability. Our second comparison, taking witness statements, is interesting. Let's start with the Murdaugh case. As it turned out, Alex Murdaugh would be proven not to be just an all-county or all-state fibber. This guy was an all-universe liar. In my opinion, the GOAT of liars. But as smart as he was, his answers to the very first officer who interviewed him at the crime scene would be critical. The question was, when was the last time you saw your wife and son? His untruthful answer, both then and each time he was interviewed by SLED agents, proved to be his downfall. Alex Murdaugh had been to the kennels within 5 minutes of his wife and son's murder, not the several hours that he had tried to get all to believe. Not only that, but Alex will be proven to have stolen money from both clients and his law partners for at least 12 years. Not just a little, but millions and millions of dollars. It was only through the meticulous questioning of the family's housekeepers, groundskeepers, friends, relatives, and law partners did Alex's massive financial fraud become discovered, and that fraud and need for money became one of the main motives for the murder put forth at trial. The incredible popularity of this televised trial was the constant revelation of pertinent facts from witness after witness, and that was only possible through the incredible hard work of interviewing hundreds of people by lead prosecutor Creighton Waters and his team. A-plus work without a doubt, in my opinion. While the South Carolina witness interviews were a model of efficiency and accuracy, in Dallas we had a very unique situation. And maybe most importantly, many witnesses who would have testified in opposition to the Commission's preconceived notion of a lone nut shooter simply were not called to testify. Let's begin by examining some key witnesses in Dealey Plaza who were never called before the Warren Commission, or who had their testimony limited or changed.
And it sounded like it came from the left and in front of us, towards the wooden fence. And there was a puff of smoke that came underneath the trees on the embankment. I was talking with a patrolman Foster at the time, and as soon as we heard the shots, we ran around to the wooden fence.
Were you subsequently questioned by agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
About a month later, I was questioned by the FBI.
Did you tell them what you told me and what you told the Dallas police?
Yes, I did.
Were you ever called as a witness by the Warren Commission?
No, sir, I wasn't.
Yes, I looked over to where I thought the shot came from, and I saw a puff of smoke still lingering underneath the trees. And this is where I saw the smoke from the third shot. They are wrong, because my testimony, and I made it very clear, that there was a fourth shot fired, and one of those shots came from behind that picket fence.
Mr. Bowers, how many shots did you hear?
There were 3 shots, and these were spaced with 1 shot, then a pause, and then 2 shots in very close order, such as perhaps almost on top of each other, while there was some pause between the first and the second shots.
Did you tell that to the Dallas police?
Yes, I told this to the police, and then also told it to the FBI, and also I had a discussion 2 or 3 days later with them concerning this, and they made no comment other than the fact that when I stated I felt like the second and third shots could not have been fired from the same rifle, they reminded me that I wasn't an expert, and I had to agree.
It was very clear to me who I had talked to and who I had called by name and who had called me by name and who I had shaken hands with and everything. But when the Warren Commission report came out, they said that probably under the stress of everything that was going on, that I most likely was confused, and that I talked to Ruby at the police station several hours later. I was dismayed when I picked up my copy of the Warren Commission report and discovered what they had decided about my testimony. And among other things, I immediately began to wonder, who else they had talked to, who they chose not to believe, and why.
On the day of the assassination, both Dallas police officers and FBI agents who had hurried to Dealey Plaza did a pretty good job of interviewing witnesses. Incredibly, by the next day, these witness statements will begin to be selectively dismissed, not believed, reported as lost, or in some cases, even changed. What was going on? Only a failing grade can be awarded. At Moselle, by securing both areas where Paul and his mother Maggie were murdered, SLED was able to preserve the best evidence in the case, the biologics. By examining the blood splatter and determining the angle of each shot, investigators were able to determine not only the angle of the shots, but also the positioning of each body before and after each bullet struck. The defense did bring in 2 witnesses who offered alternative possibilities, but the Colleton County team was incredibly prepared and offered their testimony and expert opinions in a manner that left little doubt as to their correct accuracy. Further, by securing all cell phones, experts were able to provide locations for Alex as well as Maggie and Paul up to the time of their deaths. But it was Paul's phone that the FBI never gave up on trying to unlock, and their efforts paid off. Paul's phone, finally unlocked, provided a video that proved Alex was at the kennels with Maggie and Paul just minutes before their murders. Alex was forced to change his story all in one day, and the jury did not believe his weak excuses for lying about being with his son and wife just before the shots rang out. Again, A+ for evidence collection in the Murdaugh case. It would take a weekend film festival to really explore all the evidence taken, lost, and changed in the JFK assassination case. But we have to examine the so-called magic bullet, which was postured by Junior Warren Commission counsel Arlen Specter to have caused about 1,000 injuries to 27 people. Okay, 6 or so wounds to 2 people, but not credible in any case. The so-called magic bullet was found by Daryl Tomlinson near a stretcher in Parkland Hospital. However, months later, neither Tomlinson nor any of the Secret Service or FBI agents who handled the bullet that day will agree to testify that it is Commission Exhibit 399, the bullet that is in the National Archives. But there is even better proof. That's the testimony of Daryl C. Tomlinson before the Warren Commission. It was taken on March 20th, 1964, right at Parkland Hospital by our friend Arlen Specter. And remember, Tomlinson is the man who found the bullet. There was only one question that needed to be asked that day of Tomlinson. It was obvious to everyone. That question is CE399 the bullet that you found that day here at Parkland Hospital? Incredibly, Specter never asked Tomlinson that question.
For the House Select Committee on Assassinations never saw these suppressed interviews where not only were the Dallas doctors saying there's a hole in the back of the head here, but so were the morgue witnesses saying there was a hole in the back of the head. So it was a complete abomination. It was perhaps the most dishonest thing that was ever done, and it was apparently done to keep Oswald as the central figure in this scenario.
You get the idea. There is so much failure of evidence collection and controversy surrounding much of the evidence that was collected that, again, only a failing grade is warranted. Without question, the prosecution of Alex Murdaugh was textbook in nearly every way. The incredible attention to detail and the diligence of the entire Colleton County and SLED team was nearly flawless. There is a reason that the JFK assassination is still debated so hotly after 60 years. If only the evidence and same effort at honesty and diligence had been displayed as in South Carolina, we all would have many more of the answers we still seek in that case.